In this video, I'm going to show you how to install baseboard. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. The channel's all about building your own house, saving a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. That's all I ask in return for making this video. So we got a lot to do today, so let's get started. Before installing the baseboard, I do make sure I get a nice even coat of paint on them. In order to do so, I buy the contractor's pack and lay it out on the workbench and use my airless sprayer to spray a nice even coat. And then I took the leftover hardwood flooring boxes from when we did the hardwood floor to stack them and let them dry, and as you can see, they're all scattered throughout the house. This is the door entering into the room, so I want to be sure I start my baseboard on the back wall first, which is this wall right here. Now that you know where to start at, the next thing we need to do is find the first stud on this wall, or at least close to the end of the wall. So to do that, the easiest way is to find a receptacle, and we know there's going to be a stud on the left or right side, so we're just going to take our hammer and do the tap test. So from the sounds of it, it's on the left side of this receptacle. So I'm just going to take a nail, and I don't want to go any higher than the height of my baseboard, and tap it into the wall to find that stud. It's safe to say that that is the center of the stud right there. So I'm just going to mark this with my pencil. I'm going to go and pull that nail out. And because most baseboard comes in 12-foot lengths, it's important to know how to join two pieces together to do a wall that's longer than 12 foot. So what I'm going to do now is measure the length of the wall until I get 12 foot, and I'm going to make a mark. So I know coming off the corner of this room, 12 foot gets me right here, but I got to make sure I land on a stud because that's where we got to join the two pieces of base together. So now I'm going to measure 16 on center off that mark that we made on our stud. Right here is the mark that we made for the center of our stud. So I'm just going to place my tape measure to that mark and measure out right before I hit my 12-foot mark down on this end. Just so you're aware, each red mark is a 16 on center mark on most tape measures. So right here is where the next stud is going to be, where we got to address, because that's where our two pieces of baseboard are going to overlap in a join. So this measurement is important. And then measure off the back corner of the wall to that mark. And right here is that 12-foot mark that we made off the corner, because we need to make sure we're in behind here in order to meet the stud because of the length of the trim. I'm going to get the measurement for the piece of trim I need to cut. In order to do so, I've got to measure clear from that back corner up to that mark we just made to know where to break it. So I'm going to go ahead and place it back here, tight against the wall, and then come out here. I know I need to break at 137 1/4 to that mark. I'm now going to lay a full piece of baseboard up here on the miter saw, and I highly recommend that you get a miter saw with a stand for this project because you got long lengths of base you're going to be working with, and it's going to help immensely. So now I'm going to measure over from the end of the base, and that end's going to be just a simple square cut from the factory. And we're going to measure 137 1/4 right here and make a mark. And we know that's where we need to make our cut break onto a stud. And we got two options here. We can either lay this flat and then bevel our saw to a 45-degree angle and then make our cut. Or what I like to do is keep my bevel at 0 and then just move down here at the base to a 45-degree and set our baseboard up like so, and then pull this over to a 45-degree and make our cut that way. So to me, that works best for me. And then make our 45 on that mark, and we're just going to hold tight to the fence of the saw before we cut. So make sure the baseboard is tight against the fence and that we're flat on our saw base, and make sure we cut right down that line. Now, as you can see, we got a nice 45-degree bevel on that piece of trim now. So let's go install this onto the wall. Now that we got that piece cut, I'm just going to lay it right here on the floor and tight up against the wall on this end. And then that mark that we got 16 on center, I'm going to transcribe down to the piece of base. So if we eyeball it, about right there. So we know we need to mark 16 on center off that mark across the baseboard. So in order to do so, I'm just going to pull my tape out across the baseboard, right like so. And then I'm going to lock it into place and line up my 16 on center mark here, which is that red 16 on center. We're just going to slide it until we are lined up right with that mark. So we know right here should be a stud, then each red mark. So I'm going to just mark that real lightly across the board. And now I'm going to grab a nailer, and this is just a straight finish nailer, and I got 2-inch nails in it. Very important. You don't want to get too long of nails because you risk hitting a wire. So in order to install this first piece, we're going to lay the baseboard right up against the wall, and each stud we're going to put a nail in the top and the bottom side of the trim, right on each 16 on center mark. And I'm going to start this very end first. So we're going to put a nail here. Then our next stud is right here. We're going to put it right into that board. And just a little tip, when you're using your finish nailer, you can always tell when you hit a stud or not. You'll feel some resistance when you're nailing. Just keep that in mind. Okay, and if we take a look, there's a little crack right here along the bottom of the base. In order to correct that, we got to put some down pressure when we nail it to get that bow out of it. So I'm just going to push down and then nail at the same time. Then we just keep nailing it off across the whole board till we get to the end of this piece. I now got to finish this run of base, and in order to adjoin it, I got to get a measurement to the short point of the base, which is going to be right here. So we got 67 1/8. So I'm going to cut it to length and then install it. I now got another piece of base, and I'm going to pull off this side this time and measure the 67 1/8, and I'm going to mark right at the top of this base. And now I'm going to place my saw at a 45 to where it was last time. And we're going to set it upright, and we're going to cut to where the saw blade is going to be on the right side of that mark. And as you can see, this 45 will overlap this other 45, and it's going to give it a nice finish. So all we got to do is line the overlaps up in order to continue this piece of base to make the joint. And this is going to overlap right over this other piece, and we're just going to kind of hold it into place and put a nail right into that stud through that overlap. And that looks really good. I'm now going to pull off that joint and continue my 16 on center layout and nail it to the wall. Just so you're aware, it's very important to get your doors installed and trimmed out, so that way you're not interrupted when you're installing your base and you can finish out the whole room. So now what I'm going to do is measure from this back corner over tight to that door trim, and that's going to be our measurement for our next piece. So I've got 1/18 and 1/8 heavy. I'm now going to take a full piece of baseboard, lay it up here on the miter saw, and I know this end is going to be butting up to that door trim, so it's just going to be a simple straight cut. But what I like to do, I like to cut this off square with the miter saw, because sometimes from the factory it's not perfect. So I am going to go ahead and re-square up this end just to make sure it looks really good. I'm going to set this piece of baseboard upright because we're going to have to mark on top of the baseboard. I know my measurement is 118 inches and 3/16, so I'm going to mark it right on top of this baseboard, right at the very edge. And I'm going to turn my miter saw to a 45-degree angle this way now, because we know in that corner the miter has to be cut at an angle this way, and if it was at the other side of the room, the 45 would be cut the other way. The next method we got to do is called coping, and it's going to require a coping saw. And if you want to buy one of these, I'll put a link in the description below in order to make the purchase. So the first thing we got to do is put the coping saw right at the bottom edge, and more or less what we got to do is follow this profile and cut back towards the trim, so that way when it butts up to the corner, it's going to give it a nice look. Now first, like to push into the profile like so, and just put a slight angle like so back towards it like I said, and first push down into it to get started because it's less aggressive on the teeth to push into it. And then once I get it started a couple times, I'm going to start pulling it towards me just like a regular saw. Then once I get this long cut, I'm going to start from this side and work my way down to it. And I have found that you're better off just to cut this at a 45 degree at this point and continue cutting the profile. After I make that cut, I like to take what's called a sanding sponge just to even out the cope. And if we take a look, that's the angle you want to cut at, so that way the face is going to touch before anything else and make a nice seamless joint. I'm now going to take the baseboard and lay it right up to where it's going to be installed. And as you can see, the profile is the same as the profile of the trim that's already installed. So it's going to slide right into it. And this is why we like to cope instead of cut a 45. It's because this might not be a perfect 45, then your joint's going to look really bad. And with this cope, it can be at almost any angle and it's still going to be a nice joint. So first, I'm going to slide it together tight. And that's why you cut a 45 at this top peak instead of cutting that at an angle to that point, because as you can see, there's already a piece of material that's in the way there. So that's why we cut just a 45 and then keep cutting down on the cope. And now I'm just going to shoot it right into the corner. Now we just mark our layout 16 on center and nail it off. And another tip you can do here is you can lay your tape measure out and then lock it into place and take and nail at every red mark once you're on a 16 on center. So that way you don't have to mark across your baseboard. So in this case, we can just let the tape do the job. I now want to show you how to do an outside corner. And that room did not have any outside corners, so I had to come out here to the hallway. So what the first thing you need to do is make sure you have a piece that's going to extend past your corner in order to get an accurate measurement. And just to reiterate, this is just a square cut here at the end. I'm going to go and butt straight into that corner and just hold the piece of baseboard about where it's going to be setting. I'm going to take my pencil and mark flush right with that corner. Something like that looks good. And this is a time where you definitely don't want to cut too short. If anything, a little bit too long will work out much better. So as you can see, I cut about exactly where it needs to be cut. So let's go over to the miter saw. I'm going to set the piece of base up on the miter saw. Here's my mark. But instead of putting this at a 45 degree, I found the best thing to do is find your 45 degree down here on the saw and then add just a little bit. So something like that, maybe an extra degree or so, and then lock it into place right there. And the reason why that is because these corners in the back, you're going to want to make sure you connect out in the face of this 45 instead of about here in the back, and then you're going to have a crack out in the open. So that's just a little word of advice. So just a little bit more than a 45. And now I'm going to cut straight down on that mark right where we need it to be. Another tip that's going to give you clean cuts, make sure you put a trim blade on your saw. This is a fine tooth blade. This has 100 teeth, so it's going to give you a nice looking cut. So that's something you're going to want to put on your miter saw when you go to doing your base. I'm just going to lay this piece into place that we just cut, and I'm not going to nail it yet. What I'm going to do is take another piece of base, lay it where it's going to be installed, and then do the same thing. I'm going to mark right on that corner and make the same type of cut. All right, I'm now going to put this into place and then take my other one and butt right up to it. And as you can see, that gives us a nice corner. And now something else to keep note is you're going to have to find your studs before you nail this, just like the other baseboard as well. So keep that in mind. But that's how you do an outside corner. I'm now going to show you a special case where you're going to have to build a return onto your base. And this is not the only case. If you ever have a place where you got to dead stop your baseboard, you want to put what's called a return on it. Let me show you how to do it. So this piece is going to go back here against the piece of baseboard I already have installed. So I already went ahead and coped this end. So this end is just going to fit right back into this corner. I want this baseboard to end right here where the toe kick is on the cabinet. So I'm going to place this back to where it's going to be installed, and then I'm just going to mark right to the end of that toe kick. So I know that's where the end of my 45 needs to be. All right, so because this line needs to be transcribed to the face of this, I'm just going to take my speed square and then square right up to that mark. And that way it's going to be placed here to where the 45 is actually going to be. So about right there. So that's exactly where I need to aim for. Now I'm going to place it right back against the fence and take my miter saw, and I'm going to cut right to where the edge of that mark's going to be. So now we got a nice 45 cut on that side. I now need to take the scrap piece of the trim and place a 45 on it going this way now. And just anywhere on this end, just place a 45. Now place the saw back to 0. And we're going to want to cut this off straight and make sure we don't cut any further past where this intersects the trim. So this scrap is the piece that we need to finish the return. I'm now going to place the baseboard right where it belongs and anchor it into place using my finish nailer. And now in order to finish the return, we take that little piece that we cut, and it's just going to glue right back here into place. And that's going to give us a nice finished return. After I glue the return into place, I simply just take masking tape and tape the top and bottom of the return, and then I let it dry overnight, and then after it dries I remove the masking tape and then caulk around the rough edges. Now it's time to caulk the base. I'm going to be using this Alex Plus that's made by DAP, and I always cut the very ends of my caulk gun very small. As you can see there, there's just a very little bit cut on the end. And then after I cut it, I like to take a pair of needle nose and I actually crimp this end really tight. So that way, whenever I go to use it, just a very little bit of caulk comes out, and you'll see why here in just a moment. The reason why I cut the end so small is because as you can look down here, there's a very small crack between the wall and the base trim. Some people won't even caulk this, but I feel like just a little bit of caulk in there makes it look so much better. And when I place it into the crease, instead of running it at an angle like this, I like to keep it sitting right up, so that way the end of the tube actually smooths it out really smooth as I go. So I'm going to show you how I do it. Just going to place it right in the corner and very lightly just run a nice easy bead right across that base. And then after you run that little light bead, we're just going to take our finger and quickly just swipe right across it. And look how much better that looks now. It's nice and smooth and looks very clean. And after I rub it through there, I like to take a damp rag just to keep my hands clean. To address the nail holes, I recommend that you use spackling instead of the caulking, because the caulking will shrink and you'll be able to see the nail holes easy. So I just take this spackling with a little putty knife, and I'll show you how to patch the nail holes. After you open up the spackling, you'll notice it's really similar to drywall mud, but just take a very little bit, doesn't take much. And we're just going to smear it right over that nail hole and then wipe it clean, and do that to all of the nail holes. No matter how good the cope is cut, I still like to run just a little bit of caulking there. I also want to show you a trick here as well. So I'm just going to run just a little bead right in there like so. And then I'll put a little bead right up in this part. And then I'm going to hit this top just like I did the other one. Just a quick bead. Now right here along top, I'm just going to take my finger just like normal. Right through here, right through here. And now how I like to address these corners is just take a little piece of a scrap shim and then place right into the corner and swipe up. And I know that's a lot of excess caulk, but it's better than keeping it on there and making it look really bad. So that's just a better way to give you a nice tight caulking job, and it keeps it looking really good. Now I just need to hit the nail holes and a little coat of paint over all the base, and that's all there is to it. If you'd like to know how I installed this door, check out this video. It'll help you out.